All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Perrone, and I'm excited to be here facilitating this workshop with all of you. I was lucky enough to be a teacher fellow in year one of this program, and then back for year three to work on these workshops to get this out in front of more students and teachers. And so we're going to be doing a really interesting lesson today with our sensors. We're going to see the interaction between sports and music, and how we can use the wearable music sensors to kind of bring those together. And so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And so, as always, our big goal here is helping students to have a deeper, stronger understanding of computational thinking. And we've been talking about this in each of our workshops, and we know that there's these pillars, right? These most important pieces of computational thinking. And so today, our focus is going to be primarily on pattern recognition, and really understanding the role that plays in computational thinking, and also how that allows us to make these connections to other content areas that we're teaching anyway. We're already going through it. It's really important to remember with computational thinking that it's not just about computers and computer science. It may be one way to define this to say that we're solving problems like a computer does, but in reality, this is just a really great technique for us to be able to solve problems, especially complex problems. And that's something that's valuable to our students in every facet of their lives, whether it's personal, whether that's at school, being able to just kind of break things down, understand them, look for patterns, and be able to work through them and solve these problems. And so that's the foundation we're building off of, as always, is that idea of computational thinking. And so this is our lesson, Sports Orchestra, with a nice little a catchy subtitle there, Patterned Play and Playing Patterns. And so that's really what we're going to be looking at, examining the patterns that occur naturally in play and in sports, and then giving you an opportunity to use your sensors to play out some patterns. And so that's kind of where we're going to start from. And so as we take a look up here at the slide, we can see that pattern recognition is the primary computational thinking skill, but there's also some aspect of decomposition and even some algorithm design. You start thinking about, how do I build out these patterns? That's like building an algorithm. And so those will be some of the subtext for our lesson today. We're going to be using two of our apps as well, the Soundboard, which is an individually interactive app that doesn't use the wearable music sensor, and then Sonic Introduction, when we are using the sensors to kind of bring this lesson to life and really get ourselves and our students engaged in the physical aspect, the embodied aspect of our lesson. And so in terms of where this fits in, yes, this is a sports lesson. It was written by a physical education teacher, but it also connects to the fact that we know students learn better when they have oxygen flowing to their brain, their blood is up, right? And so physical activity, getting them up, getting them moving is helpful across the board. It's just helpful for them to get their brains working in optimum shape. And especially, if you're an online teacher and you have those students sitting in front of their screens all day, get them up, get them moving, helps with the buy-in and engagement, but also helps, we know, just get their brain working a little bit better. And so, yes, PE, physical education, is certainly a primary component of this, but you could also connect this to other physical activities like dance, like other sports, other physical motions that you can go through. And then there's more than that, right? There's computer science involved. There's the idea behind computational thinking, which is that foundation of coding. And then even ELA and mathematics, and we'll talk about how does this lend itself to storytelling or interpreting stories and patterns that show up that way. And then the mathematics of being able to understand that there's patterns in math and looking at how we solve different problems. And so really you can kind of see how this can be implemented across a wide array of content, and that helps us because we know sometimes we're not given a lot of motivation to do STEM activities with our students. And our administration sometimes wants that emphasis on ELA and math. We can say, yeah, we're working that in, we're doing all of it, and our students are actually enjoying it and engaged. So it's really nice to see that this is truly cross-curricular. Time-wise, this is broken down across 3 lessons. You know your students and your situation best. You know what's going to work well for them. The actual lesson plan itself lends itself to being broken up across 3 periods, about 40 to 60 minutes each. So 3 class periods, and that kind of gives you an idea of how the flow will work. But if it's something new for you and your students, you might want to sit with it and take a little longer, or do it in smaller pieces and let them kind of have those conversations and then come back to it again and kind of dive deeper as you go along. So as you're finishing up reading through those objectives, you can see there's quite a range of different activities, from identifying patterns, demonstrating basic techniques in sports, specifically batting, and then connecting the movement to some of the mathematical components like the axes and inputs and outputs for computer science. So you really do see that these objectives tie into all the different cross-curricular connections that we're talking about here. All right, so when you do this lesson, what materials you're gonna need? You're gonna need about 3 or 4 wearable music sensors, depending on the size of your groups. Typically 3 works out just fine. You'll need the soundboard and sonic introduction apps. And then there's some extra bonus items that are optional, but make it a little bit more fun for your students. Things like having a Nerf bat or a soft baseball bat or a wiffle ball bat, any of those will work. And then some sort of ball that might be safe for your context. If that's inside a classroom, something softer might be better. If you are able to do this in a gym or a little bit more space, then you can be a little bit more flexible. It's a great opportunity to reach out to your PE teacher on your site and say, hey, I have this idea, let's do this together, and see where it fits in to make those connections. And students often see us as this fixture in our classroom, like, what? You're gonna be working with this other teacher, you're gonna be talking to my other teachers? And so it's exciting to be able to make those connections. I worked quite a bit with our PE teacher when I was running through some of these activities in year 1, and it was always great to have the students be able to see, oh, technology and PE and physical activity and STEM and these different ways that they connect. So it's pretty valuable to make those connections. And then of course, a laptop for your students to connect to their sensors. There's some video clips throughout the lesson. You can choose which ones you want to use. Some are about sound and music. Some of them are about baseball and technique, and whatever you feel comfortable showing them yourself versus using a video, that's also an option. But they're all linked in the lesson plan, so you don't have to go looking for that, which is nice. So that's kind of the outline of the lesson with our materials and it's kind of the structure. So we're gonna just jump right in. And so if you're comfortable, what I'd like you to do is I'm gonna have you close your eyes so that we can really focus in on our listening. And we're gonna listen real carefully to a series of sounds. And what I want you to think about is determining what the sound is, and then perhaps where you might hear this collection of sounds. All right, so if you hear that collection of sounds, where do you think you might be? Where might you hear these sounds? What do we think?
Ball game.
A ball game. What kind of ball game?
Baseball, softball.
Right, yeah, baseball or softball. And so really we're gonna start off by focusing on this collection of sounds from a baseball or softball game, which is gonna give us an opportunity to kind of have this shared foundation for our students. Some students are less familiar, right? And so it might be something where you wanna have a little video of baseball to go off of, or ask them for their input and say like, hey, how many people have seen a baseball game? Maybe your school has a baseball team or a softball team. Maybe they've seen it on television, or maybe they've had a chance to go out to a game and watch some people play. Some people might be like, oh, my dad plays softball, right? So sometimes you get those different stories from your kids and get that buy-in. But we also want to make sure we're building that foundation, because we do have students who come from different experiences. And for some of our students who have little or no experience with baseball or softball, we want to make sure that we're building that up. You could tie this in with a piece of fiction. You could have a book that you read to them about going out to a baseball game. It could be nonfiction about the sport itself. There's different ways for us to build that foundation so that we all have that shared experience. Because as you go through the process, you can refer back. Remember when we watched that video? Remember the book we read? And so it's just an opportunity for us to make sure that we're including all of our learners and bringing in different ways of showing that, whether it's through reading or through video, helps to make sure we're accounting for some of the neurodiversity that we have in our classrooms. Okay, so I'm gonna play through the sounds one more time. And this time, I want you to think about what motion a person might be going through as this sound is being created, right? And so if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to kind of mime that out with us as we go through this. But we're just thinking about, okay, now we're connecting these sounds that we're hearing at a baseball or softball game, and we're connecting them to the motion that goes with that sound. So it's usually kind of this gesture with your hand. Yeah, you're out, you kind of close your fist, or you're gonna go back, so I was doing it this way, you're out.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
all right, so one of the other things I want you to think about here as we get ready to move on now is, are these sounds in order? Do they make a pattern that makes sense? And again, you're gonna wanna have built some foundation for your students or use this as an opportunity to give them this kind of challenge because they may not know, but are these sounds in order? So I'm gonna play them one more time. You can get up and move if you want to.
No.
And I want you to think about whether or not they're in order. It's like you think about what you're watching a game. Is this what would come first? So, all right, that's kind of an interesting thing to start with. And then somehow you go from that to this, which we saw, especially thanks to Cole, was running, right? Running around the bases. So we cheer first and then people run around the bases.
Yeah.
And then that, remember, is that catch, right? The sound of the ball being caught. But the ball is caught before it's hit. So we're trying to think through, and then that could be, maybe that's close to the right position, but we're thinking about the patterning here of these sounds. We're trying to think through this process. So let's dive in a little bit deeper to that concept now. And we think about pattern recognition, right? So pattern recognition is the process of identifying patterns, of course, or similarities in a data set. And so we can think of anything in terms of data, including sports, or in this case, baseball. When you think about the data of baseball, and think about the experience of watching it or playing it, you start to think, yeah, there are some patterns. There are certain orders that things tend to go in. And yes, like with any good data set, there are anomalies and things that are extraneous, right? There are things that don't quite make sense, but they do happen. But overall, there's some specific patterns. So I'm gonna let you read through that definition paragraph on pattern recognition, and then we'll go ahead and get ready to move on. So it says something about similarities and differences. And so when you think about a game like baseball, some of the things happen over and over again. And so that's where you're going to start to see those similarities, maybe from one inning to the next. And you can start to introduce some baseball vocabulary in there. One inning to the next and see like, oh, are some of these things happening in the same order in each inning? And of course, we're thinking about baseball, and we're thinking about sounds, and we're thinking about computational thinking. And the common thread that ties all of these together is patterns, right? We can have patterns in baseball, we can have patterns in sounds, and patterns is one of the foundations of computational thinking. So really, it can be helpful to kind of highlight that for your students or ask them to think about those connections because we want that, right? We want that explicit connection. This is new for a lot of students. We want to make sure that we're not just assuming, oh, they got it because I talked about computational thinking on slide 1, that now we're on slide 6 and 10 and 12, that they still are thinking about that. So make sure we kind of go back and touch on that, spiral through it as we work on the lesson so that the students can kind of make those connections more solidified. So now we know the pattern recognition definition, we know what we're working with here, and so we're ready to kind of move on and see what comes next. So if we're talking about patterns, and we said that maybe these sounds are not in the right order, then what our task needs to be is to put them in the right order. And so what I'd like you to do is you're going to navigate to the Soundboard app, and you're going to see if you can put these sounds in order. Now there's a lot of sounds in the Soundboard app, so I've listed them out here in the order that I played them for you, right? So I played the crowd cheering sound, I played running on dirt second, I played the sound of a catch third, the sound of a baseball bat, of a hit, right? A baseball bat fourth, and then the narration of the umpire saying, "You're out." So that's the order they're currently in. So let's take a couple of minutes and see if we can put them in an order that makes more sense, if we can make a pattern, if we can identify the pattern of these sounds. And so I'd like you to start off with working on this kind of solo for a minute or two, and then we'll invite you to work with a partner or someone else on Zoom. You can share in the chat. Those of us here in person can chat with a neighbor and see what we can come to consensus on this order. And if you're not a baseball aficionado and this is not your thing, that's okay. Just see if you can figure out what makes sense, and then we'll work through it together.
I'm trying to find it.
It's just called baseball bat. Yeah.
Oh. So it was our hit. Okay, so it hit and then.
All right, so let's go ahead and see what we came up with. What was the consensus here on the first sound? What do you think?
Bat.
The hit,
The
yeah.
bat. So the
Yeah.
first sound we have is the ball being hit, okay? And then what happens after that? After a batter hits the ball, what do?
Run.
They're gonna run the bases or attempt to, right? So they're running, and then what happens?
But cheering, excited.
Yeah, so one option is that when you hit the ball in baseball, depending on where you hit it, the crowd might cheer right away, right? Like, oh, you hit it, you're running and there's cheering, it's great until what happens? And then someone catches the ball and then you're what?
out.
You're out. So that's an option, that is a pattern, but it's not the pattern, right? There's more than one. So what's another option? You hit the ball and then you're running and then what happens?
Catch.
The ball is caught
Out.
And then cheering.
and then you're out, and then you're cheering. So I guess it depends whether your home team is
Yeah.
the team that's batting or the team that's fielding, right? So there's
Or
a lot
off is.
that goes into this.
That's
So-
not the team you wanted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the idea here is it depends on what you're envisioning, and there's different patterns to go with that. So when you watch baseball, one option is that you hit the ball, and maybe it's on the ground, and you're running to first base, and one of their players picks it up and throws it to the first baseman, and he catches it. There's that catch sound before you get there, and that means you're out. And then the crowd cheers because apparently they don't like you, or let's say they like the other team, right? So there's different options here, and so what we're seeing is there's different patterns. But we know that these patterns are built on a foundation of experience, and that's why it's so important for us to either use this to build that experience for our students, or to ensure that they've shared some, semblance of this experience beforehand. And so if you know, again, your PE teacher is going to teach softball or baseball, this could be done afterward. But remember in PE, when you played this, then they have that foundation to build off of. And that's really valuable because we know their brains are going to make connections based on what's already there. And so that's really helpful for them because this might be new for a lot of students. And so I appreciate everyone participating there. Hopefully those of you online were able to kind of get in the app and go through that order. And so now we can see we're building the foundation here just among us as part of this workshop to see some of these components and how they go together, both the content, which is the baseball and the sounds, and then the pedagogy, like how this is being taught and how this is used with our students. All right, so let me go ahead and get back into our lesson. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all right if you're not as familiar with baseball as the teacher. One of the big things that we see in all of computer science, of which computational thinking is part, is being like a lead learner. This is a terminology that comes from code.org and other organizations. As the teacher, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know all the answers. And sometimes it's better if you don't, because then when students ask you questions, you can say, let's explore that together. And so this might be a great example. If you're not a big baseball fan, if that's not your area of expertise, you can say, I'm not sure what this order should be. Let's explore it. Let's watch some videos. Let's think about when you played it in PE. Let's build that knowledge together.
Yeah,
It's
but
really
even
valuable.
If you are an expert, you can still do that.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you are an expert, you're right. You don't need to give them the answers. You can still guide them and facilitate that discovery and kind of work through it with them. And so that's a great opportunity for you to be part of the learning process with your students. And sometimes they might be frustrated when you won't answer their question, and that's okay. That's okay for them to work through that struggle, and you're there to facilitate and guide them along the way. Okay, so we had a couple of different patterns shared out, both very feasible patterns, both definitely something that could happen at a real baseball or softball game. And so what we're now ready to do is we're ready to kind of move on and build out some more of those baseball foundations. And remember that these slides are built right out of the lesson plan that we all have access to, and that gives you even more depth and detail than what we're seeing today. And so we've already noticed that there's quite a bit of vocabulary that can be used, and this is not a comprehensive list on this slide by any means, but you see some of the terms, and some of them are computational thinking related, and some of them are sports related, and some of them are sound or music related. And so again, it's just that reinforcement that this can be a very cross-curricular activity, which is what we want. We want this to bring in different aspects of learning and allow the students to build out that broader network of understanding, rather than learning these things all siloed, like, oh, we're only going to learn about patterns, we're only going to learn about music, we're only going to learn about sports. But in the real world, in life, these are interconnected, and we want to show that to our students. And so you see our list of vocab there, things like a baseball game, or a home run, or a foul ball. These are terms that students may not be familiar with. It's an opportunity for some of your students to maybe show their expertise. Students who don't normally get to be the one with the answers, they might all of a sudden be the one that says, oh, I know what a home run is. It's where you hit the ball and you run around all the bases and come back to home and you score a run. And this one time I was playing baseball and that happened. I was so like, all of a sudden you get this buy-in from students because they get to share some of their expertise, some of their experiences. And sometimes it's not the ones who are always the best at computational thinking and coding. And so it kind of broadens the scope for our students to understand, like, oh, I can be part of this. And so we see it now. We see the baseball, we've seen the patterns, but it's called Sports Orchestra, right? And so now we need to kind of understand a little bit better about what that means and how those work together. And so you see a definition up here. An orchestra is a group of musicians that play instruments together. And maybe some of your students have experience not with baseball, but with being in an orchestra. And again, you get this more inclusive environment where students with different backgrounds, different strengths can feel seen and can feel like they're giving something back to the class. And so we have this idea, right? We have musicians, people that make music, play music, in this case, playing instruments together. And so we have this opportunity, that's what these lessons are built around, right? It's making sounds, making music. And so we're gonna watch a video now about how some professionals put together sounds and music with physical activity and action, and these are called Foley artists. And so we're going to go ahead and take a look now at a video. So that may be something new. I know that video in particular was new to me, and it's an opportunity again for us to kind of expand our students' understanding of how things work, and they might start watching videos and movies and a whole new appreciation for the sound effects that are going on. Because I know with our students growing up in the generation of technology, we were talking about this before our session started today, you might think like, oh, all the tech is used to make all the sounds. You just play, oh, rain sound, waterfall sound. But Cole was talking about his experience with doing some Foley work, and that you want sometimes unique sounds. It is interesting to think about everything that goes into something like making a movie or even a short clip. And so what that, for me, ties into are some of these workplace skills, right? So we have this list of neurodiverse workplace skills, and these are things, again, that we're hoping that our students develop because they're valuable across, again, all areas, all facets of their life. So things like problem solving, right? You could imagine a Foley artist encounters a lot of problems, and that didn't sound right, that it was too much of this, not enough of that, and that mixer's job then is to communicate with them. Right? And that's that second skill, is that communication is so valuable, because if the mixer just keeps all of their thoughts to themselves, the Foley artists don't know if something sounds good or not, and you're not going to get the finished product you want. Or if you have incomplete communication where you just say, that's no good, do it again. Well, how am I supposed to make it better if I don't know why it wasn't good? And so that's something we can consider with this activity with our students, is how are they communicating about it? When we get into the group work part, where they're actually using the soundboard and physical motions at the same time, they need to be able to communicate just like Foley artists do. And of course, persevering, right? It goes along with problem solving. We need our students to be able to not give up after the first attempt. And sometimes that's a struggle with students. I think always, but especially today, in being able to look at something and say, yeah, you know, that wasn't successful, but I'm gonna keep going, I'm gonna keep trying. And having these more open-ended activities and these creative opportunities, I think that really gives them more buy-in to keep pursuing an end goal. That goes along with the collaboration, right? So our next skill is collaborating. You can't do this alone. The Foley artist can't do it alone. You can't be mixing at the same time that you're making the sound. And we saw some of those sounds were so complex, you just can't do it all by yourself. And so you need that team, you need people around you. And these sort of situations where you're using multiple sensors, when you're trying to throw a ball, hit a ball, and catch a ball at the same time, you can try to be a one-man show, but that's not gonna work out real well for you. And so understanding the importance of collaboration, and we know that sometimes students from a neurodiverse background, that may not be one of their strengths naturally, but when given an opportunity to do it in a meaningful way, and not just like, hey, go do that worksheet in a group, but it's not like, hey, you see the natural need to have someone working with you and communicating with you, that can generate an opportunity to develop a skill that's super valuable as they move forward. And the last one is creating, right? That's both a sense of creativity and the physical act of creating something that didn't exist before. And we know that working through projects that have already been done and all the answers are already known, that's something that can be done by a computer, that can be done by robotics, by artificial intelligence. So what are we looking at here for the future of human endeavors and human work? It's creativity, it's creating things that haven't been done before. And so providing that opportunity, it can't be overstated how important that is. And the unfortunate part is when I go out into high schools all over the state and I ask students, like, how often are you asked to be creative? And they say never. That's not what a lot of our school systems have been built to prize. And yet it's one of the most important things we can do for them. And so these projects, they really allow a lot of creativity, a lot of creating. And you'll see as we get toward the end of the lesson into the adaptations and extensions, it's all creativity. It's all on the students to be able to take these ideas, make them their own, and come up with something new. And so hopefully you can recognize that value that's built into this lesson, that really isn't about computational thinking. It's not about music. It's not about physical education. It's about life skills that are valuable for these students across the board. So hopefully that comes across. All right. So what are we going to do next? We're going to be working with a Google Doc or a piece of paper. If you're here in person, we have a copy of this table. It's linked in the presentation. It's linked in the Google Drive. It's called Sports Orchestra Table. It's got a nice specific name for you. And it's actually got both of our tables that we need. This first one you can see on the slide. And we're going to go ahead and do the first one together, the first line. You're welcome to fill this in as an example, or you can do all your own and just listen as we do this as an example. So if you click on the table in the slide deck, it's actually going to prompt you to make a copy. That way you can edit it, you can type in it, and it doesn't do anything to the master copy of the Google Doc. And the task here is you're going to write the name of the sound under the title of the sound clip. And so that's going to be coming out of the Soundboard app. And you're going to look at it and you're going to say maybe it's baseball bat. And so you'll just write in there, title of sound clip, baseball bat. And then in the third box, the one on the right, you're going to record what it sounds like. And you can be a little onomatopoeia here, right? You can write out the sound, write ting or ping or whatever you think that sounds like, or you can describe it. It sounds like a metal bat hitting a ball, right? And then the third thing you're going to do is you're going to describe the motion. And so now you're going to have that opportunity to visualize what does it look like when someone hits a ball. And we got a chance to stand up and go through some of these motions earlier. And so you might be writing something along the lines of, it's a person swinging a bat and hitting a ball, right? That's the motion. It's the physical motion is swinging the bat and the contact between the bat and the ball. And so you can go ahead and, like I said, write those in as an example. And then you're going to go through the additional sounds that we've used so far. Things like the cheering crowd, running on dirt, the catch, and the you're out sounds. You're going to record those as your title of the sound clip, and then your job is to describe what the sound's like and what the motion might be. And if you have questions, drop them in chat if you're on Zoom, ask a partner here in person, And we're going to take a few minutes now to go through this and fill in the Sports Orchestra table. If you have any questions on getting there, Cole just dropped the link into the chat for those of you on Zoom. And you can kind of pull that up. If you're in person and you need the link, there should be a link to the Google folder in your email that came out earlier this week, and that will have this document in it as well, in addition to the slide deck. All right, let's go ahead and take 5 minutes and work through this, and then we'll get together and see how we're doing. All right, hopefully everyone had a chance to get in and take a look at the table and at least get through a couple of sounds. If anybody who'd like to share out one of their answers, you can type it out in the chat if you're on Zoom, or you can share here in person. What was one of the sounds you picked and what went with it? What was the activity, the motion that went with that? So what do we think?
So I put, but I'm struggling with the right words.
Okay.
So sliding into base, you're running,
Right.
you go down, and you slide and you make contact with the base.
Yeah, no, I think that works. That is a tricky one to describe.
The sounds, to me, when you think about the sounds, it's like, it's not a grind, but
Yeah.
it's,
yeah.
I don't know how to.
No, I get it. I get
And
it.
then plop because you get the base. So I don't know how to describe that.
Is it like
No.
scrape?
Yeah, scrape.
Maybe it's
grind.
scraping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
It depends on where you're playing. But
Yeah.
What's the surface, yeah?
Yeah.
Come on, also what the running is, if they have cleats, it's gonna make a different sound. than
Right,
if
so-
they're tennis shoes.
And their technique, because
Yeah.
sometimes it ends in an
Yeah, because of,
oh.
I thought about that too because
Right, absolutely. So hopefully everyone had a chance to kind of get in there, mess around with the soundboard app, and kind of get a feel for some of those sounds. Those sounds will also be present in Sonic Introduction when we get there, which will allow you to use them with the sensors, which is where we're headed. The input might be like the motion that the person is going through, and you can imagine them doing that, and then the output is going to be the sound based on that. So if a person is running, that's their motion, that's their input, then what's the sound that comes out of that? That's the output, and that's the sound of like cleats on dirt. Yeah, sounds like running, exactly, sounds like running. And so that's the physical motion is your body being in motion, your legs moving, right, you're running. But then the sound, we try to get more details, like the shoes hitting the ground in rapid succession, right? So being more detailed about that. But when we can think about all of this, the input is what we're doing. So if your input is swinging the bat at the ball, but then what does it sound like? It sounds like a metal ting sound, right? In this case, if you have a metal bat, or make it a crack or a clack if you're using, yeah, crunch, crunch, crunch. That's great sound effects there. Thank you.
Yeah, really bad at reading one.
Yeah, so that's definitely another option, since if they have experience watching professional baseball, it would be a wooden bat. But yeah, it is a little.
swish. Because you didn't hit the ball, it's just a swish.
Yeah, when
And
you
it,
miss.
in professional baseball,
Yeah.
that's what you hear. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, and they have like the strike one, strike two, so you could do that. But yeah, actually swinging and missing, and then we're talking about the actual pitch. What's the sound of a pitch? And even if it's just like here's the windup and the pitch, it goes with the motion to do that. So we're gonna look at seeing what we can kind of figure in there. But good, great. That'll work for us to understand some of the foundations here. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna stick in the soundboard, and we're gonna work kind of collaboratively here. And so Jazz and I'll come over and join some of our participants in person. Those of you who are on Zoom, you can work in the chat to kind of work together. And what we're going for here is having one person that's making a motion, right? They're going through one of the motions that's aligned to our soundboard sounds. And the other person's going to act like a Foley artist. And they're going to actually make the sound using the soundboard app. And so this is now getting us again up, moving around, having some of our students moving. If you have groups of students of 4, then you can have up to 3 different people making different motions in order, right, in the pattern that makes sense. And that 4th person is sitting there at the soundboard app, and they're the Foley artist. They're triggering the sound that aligns with the motion of their classmates. And so the idea here is that we want the motion to be in the same pattern as the sound. If you're on Zoom, and if you're doing this remotely, we know that synchronization of sound is tricky. And so we don't need them to be perfectly in sync. We just need to be in the right order or pattern. And so if you have someone who's making the motion of swinging the baseball bat and you're ready there to make the bat sound, it's okay if the sound comes a little bit later. Just don't go to the next motion before that first sound has been used. Okay, so we're gonna work through that here in person and online. If the two of you would like to be able to kind of show the motion with each other, hopefully. This is an opportunity for us to consider the inclusive nature of this activity. It doesn't have to be a baseball movement. You can look through the soundboard and maybe it's the crowd cheering, because then you can sit and you can clap. Maybe some students don't have the mobility to get up or the comfort to get up and do a baseball motion in front of a group. But some of these motions are simpler, they're easier for them to do. Calling a strike, clapping with the cheering of the crowd. Look through those sounds, see what you feel comfortable with, and then you're going to communicate that with your partner, with your group, so that one person does the motion and the other person does the sound effect.
Still running. You're right, it's a long way to first base.
It's a really long way to first base.
Oh, so now I'm still running.
Keep going.
Going all the way. So there you go.
Yeah, but that's when you're gonna run and you're gonna do this.
So you play the cheering again. There it goes. All right, I think we're all set. You're gonna take it away.
Next up to bat.
Woo!
Strike one. It's a long fly ball to left.
All right. All right, so hopefully you got an opportunity to see that this can be another fun opportunity for the students to get up and move around a little bit. They have some creative flexibility to choose their pattern, right? We go back to that big piece, that foundation of computational thinking is, understanding patterns, building patterns, and kind of looking at that and saying, okay, yeah, we're starting to see that certain orders make sense. If you get up to bat the ball and you're out before you even pitch it, that's a problem, right? So we want to make sure that they're recognizing that as much as this is fun and it's creative, there's also a sense of order to a pattern, and that some patterns work in the real world, work in something like a sport, and others don't. And so hopefully they're getting that opportunity, and we're building again that foundational knowledge of what does baseball look like? What are some of the possibilities for these patterns, for this order?
Do we want to hear from online?
Yeah, so Jazz and Sonia, and I know Tripti was there for part of it. So what did we think? How did it go? This is kind of just the steps that we just went through, going through where one person got to be the Foley artist. Hopefully you were able to take some opportunities to take turns. The other group members are making the baseball motions. I love, Sonia, that you were doing them with hand gestures. I love that models that there's different ways of doing this. You have a student who, not feeling included because maybe they're not able to model running or moving around. Just showing that there's different ways to do that, that was terrific. So I appreciate that you did that. And just kind of showing that even though it's Zoom and it's not perfectly synchronized, a lot of the sounds have a duration, right? They're not just instantaneous, and that gives you that chance to give that appearance that the action goes with the sound. So I appreciate that everyone was able to do that and really kind of just jump in there and participate with us. We want to go ahead and jump back in here. During the break, I went ahead and set up one of our baseball bats, and you can see there's some instructions here. I'm going to click over to the next slide though, so you can see the actual visual of how this is set up. And I'm going to disconnect our power source, so hopefully you can also see on the camera up there the way that it's connected. And you want to, typically if you're using a foam bat, this is not so much an issue. With the plastic bat, you want to make sure this doesn't slide off the end. And so you want to tighten it between the handle, where you put your hands, and the barrel of the bat, somewhere here. You can tighten it and then slide it up and make sure it's snug. That way when you or the students are swinging, you're not throwing the sensor across the room. We don't want to do that. So that's the idea behind the setup on the bat. One of the options that I found, you can definitely work with this, work with your students and explore what are the best options for setup in Sonic Introduction. And so we're going to be using the Sonic Introduction app. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat for you. And then, let's see if we can't pull this up where you can see it. And so I've connected my sensor here. You can see that sensor 1 is connected. If we click on that, you can see that B1 is connected there. And I have it set right now to the X-axis on the sensor. And then I have the baseball bat sound that's ready to go. And what we'll see here is if I move this back and forth, you can see that this is moving. This tells me that I'm connected, that it's receiving data. And so as it says in the instructions, you're gonna wanna have it with the sensor facing you. And when we take it back slowly, hopefully we don't trigger the sound on the backswing. And then when we swing it through, we should get that sound. And so we could hear it there. It made that baseball bat sound, which is what we're going for. And so we're gonna go ahead and jump back over to our slides for a second. That way we can get set up and you can get started. Now, if you don't have a bat, that's okay. So that's certainly an option. You can put this on your wrist instead of on the bat. So instead of having it set up on the bat like this, you just put this on your wrist like a watch. And then when you swing your hands like you're swinging a baseball bat, you'll get that same motion and it'll pick up the motion on the sensor on your wrist. So this can be done with or without the prop of having a bat. That way, again, you don't have to have anything extra. But if you do, you definitely get a little bit more engagement and buy-in from students if they actually get to swing a bat around. I would hesitate to use a wooden or a metal bat inside, but that is your call as a teacher. But you know, little plastic bats like this, Nerf bats, you should be able to even have a student maybe bring one in or borrow one from your PE teacher. Should be a lot of options, so you don't need to go out and buy anything else. And so, being that this lesson was created as a physical education collaboration with computational thinking, we want to talk a little bit about the term technique. And technique just refers to how a process of physical action should go. And we have the option of using videos for this. But I'm just going to go through a couple of motions with you now to show you what you might want your students to do in terms of the technique of a baseball swing. And so I'm going to step aside from the TVs because I don't want to hit those either. And hopefully the camera is going to follow me to be able to see. So again, we're setting up with the sensor facing the person who's holding the bat. And we have 4 steps here. The first step is going to be the grip. And so traditionally you're going to have your left hand if you're right-handed batter, and we'll show you both ways. It's going to be your bottom hand and it's going to be against the knob at the end of the bat. Your second hand is going to go on top of it so that they are touching. Okay, and so with this, you have the sensor still facing you, and then once we have the grip, right, so then we're going to go ahead and do the load, which means we're going to move the bat back over our shoulder, and we're going to have our weight resting on our back foot. So I moved my weight, I've shifted it, I've loaded it now to my back leg, my back hip, and I've got the bat back. This allows us to do the next step, which is the stride. That's your left foot. You can choose to take a step. Professional baseball players will take a step forward as they swing, but you don't have to. You can just shift your weight from your back foot to your front foot as you're swinging, and that's gonna be where you see in these steps here with our stride, right? That's gonna be your front foot coming forward or your weight shifting forward, and that's gonna then drive your hands to swing. And so you're gonna hear that sound as you go through. So again, we're gonna have the grip, we're gonna have the load, which is the weight back and the bat up, the stride, and the swing, okay? And so that's gonna give you those kind of a pattern, if you will, of a baseball swing. It's just another way for us to talk through that process with our students. And I bet your PE teacher would be happy to come in and do a little mini guest visit to your classroom, or maybe record a video of them if you want to, again, integrate other personnel. Or you could even have students get up who maybe are baseball players and demo this. So it doesn't have to be on you to do all of it. And anytime you can have a real person in the room with you doing this, as opposed to just a random YouTube video, that's definitely ideal. But if you're teaching remotely and you'd like a video, there's a link in the lesson plan where it'll take you through these 4 steps of the baseball swing technique, okay? And so what we could hear there was actually that sonic introduction was playing the sound that went along with the motion. So we're going to create a baseball pattern of movement and sound. Okay, so you're going to be working with your group again, and you're going to be thinking about what sounds you want to use, but instead of triggering them through soundboard this time, we want to trigger the sounds using the sonic introduction app and our wearable music sensor. So there's some decision making that has to go into this. One option is to use actual pieces of equipment, such as a baseball, right, that you can actually strap your sensor to and toss it. Or you can use it attached to a bat like we have here. But of course you can also wear the sensor on a wrist or in a hand to do different motions that will give you your sound effects. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going through this process and identifying what motion is going to trigger a sound effect that will go together. So before, one person was clicking the baseball bat sound and soundboard while the other person was swinging. Now those things are going to be combined using the sonic introduction app and the wearable music sensor so that one person can do both pieces. They're doing the motion and it's automatically triggering the sound. So I wonder if we could get some ideas of other baseball sounds that we've seen so far and what motion might go through that, only now using the sensor. So what's one of the other sounds that you could make, and what's the motion that might trigger it using our wearable music sensors? What do you think? So Sylvia or Sean, do you have an idea of one of the sounds and what the motion might be for them? No, I know. I know. What do we think? What's one of the other baseball sounds that we've used today? Those of you on Zoom can definitely drop an idea in the chat as well.
Cheering.
Cheering, okay. And so what are some of our options for if we're using our sensor? What might work for making a cheering sound, you think?
Y-axis.
So y-axis, putting your hands up, I'm seeing a motion like this. You have to think about what axis that's going to be, that's going to trigger that sound. And so we have these different options, right? So you're going to be working, and this will be perseverance, problem solving, troubleshooting, on what sounds and motions go together that look like what you might see at a baseball game. So if you're using the cheering, maybe it is the motion putting your hands up triggered on the Y, or maybe it's rotating around the Z, right? And so we're looking at different options that are going to let us trigger the sounds using our sensors. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with our groups together in the chat, the main chat in Zoom, and then we can split out to breakout rooms as well again to go through that, just so we can work through some of the questions that we might have and the setup of the sensors with sonic introduction. I want to make sure everyone's got it set up and that we're ready to go. So right now, what your task will be is to open the sonic introduction app, which is linked in chat and also of course on the website and in the documentation of the lesson plan. And to get your sensors connected to that. You can just have one sensor connected for right now to sonic introduction, and we're going to go through the process of making at least one sound that goes along with the motion. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started with that process. Let's get connected. Please ask questions. Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and copy the link again to
So,
sonic
First,
introduction.
we can either get
There
some
you go.
instruments aspect, email
After we
Corey.
put on,
Who's in there? Yeah.
Okay,
but yeah,
what do you want us
So-
to do?
You can email me or email Corey.
I don't want to interrupt. There's some good conversations going on, but we do want to wrap up and have a chance to explore and play a bit. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're actually going to do this next part together. And we're going to open up our Sports Orchestra table again. Don't have that up there, so let me go ahead and pull it up so everyone can kind of see it together. Alright, so we used this Google Doc earlier to document this part. Hopefully that looks familiar. Now if we scroll down, we're going to see a new table. And so this is going to give us an opportunity to share out what we discovered as we explored this process. And so what we want to be able to do is kind of fill in this this box. So the way I was using it, and I'll do it under the example here, I was using the x-axis and I was swinging the bat with the baseball bat sound on tap, and it should sound like a metal bat hitting a ball, right? So I mean, that's kind of where we started off, if you recall. I had this sensor on the bat, so you can see that, and if I would just bring it back slowly and then swing through, I would get that sound, right? And I had that set up in the Sonic Introduction app on the x-axis using tap. And so if we switch back here, we'll see that we have the x-axis selected, the test sound is the bat, it's on sensor 1, and we're using the tap section as opposed to the loop section. So Cole, did you want to give us a little bit about the difference between those two sections and why you might use one or the other?
Sure. Tap and loop are kind of the two primary modalities for activating sounds. Tap is a sort of like a instantaneous one shot. So when you activate some sort of condition, it will play the sound. So in this case, it's moving the sensor past some threshold, which is that arrow you see. And the sensor movement is kind of shown by that little purple bar. So if Jonathan moves the sensor, you can see the purple bar move. And once it passes that arrow, it triggers the sound. So that's what tap is, it's for one shots. In sound, there's another modality of triggering, which is called looping. And that's kind of more of a active, a repeating sound. So looping is really good for more ambient things, like the cheering, for example. So you could plug the cheering into the loop, and then once you move or tilt your sensor, it's at the bottom. It's called sports cheering.
Sports.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then if you connect it to there, and then bring the volume up on the loop section.
There.
And then if Jonathan tilts his bat now, so if you twist it, you can hear the sound is always playing, and if Jonathan is off axis, the cheering will be louder. If he's kind of in the middle, it'll stop. So those are kind of the two different modalities. Looping sounds where you want it to kind of just keep playing, like the running, for example. And then one-shot sounds, ones that you want to trigger with a specific condition, like the bat hitting or a catch sound. Sorry, lengthy explanation.
No, thanks, Cole. I mean, I think that's nice because you think about this, if you did this with students, some of the sounds are pretty long to begin with, the cheering or the running, but if you were able to do this in a gym or outdoors, and you actually wanted them to have that running sound the whole time they ran the bases, it's going to take more than one play of that audio clip.
Mm-hmm.
And so by using loop, let's say they're moving, and it's triggering that sound on the loop, it'll keep making that sound as long as they're running. And the hope is when they stop, the sound stops too, which is what you want because you want those two to go together. Okay, so that's the difference between tap and loop. So who can give me an example of some setup that they had? The access, what technique, the movement, right? The title of the sound clip, and whether you use tap or loop. And then we of course have what it sounds like. So who can give me an example from one of the ones they used during our exploration? What do you think?
The y-axis for the year out.
Okay, y-axis. And the title is You're Out, okay. And then what would be the motion for that?
Good.
So like a hand gesture over the shoulder.
Mhm.
Okay, and then is that with tap or loop?
Tap.
Just tap, because you usually just say that once. And it's pretty self-explanatory. What does that one sound like?
You're out.
A person saying, you're out. Ooh. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I got one that came in on Zoom, was x-axis, and for tilt, okay. And then it was the cheering one. So this was sports, cheer, and they used the loop, and it sounds like clapping. And so you were tilting. Can you describe for us what that tilt would look like, the actual motion? And you can either put in chat or you can come off mute if you'd like to share it that way. This is Trip, do you share that?
I just tilted my sensor towards the right, kind of.
Okay. So it's tilted. What was the orientation like? Was the sensor facing you when you went to the right, or was it like laying flat? How would you describe that?
It was facing the other way, and then I just tilted it to the right.
Okay. All right, perfect. Do we have one more that we'd like to fill in here? So did you have one? I know you and Cole were having a great conversation over there about the setup and the system.
I use the y-axis too.
Okay.
For the baseball catch, I like that one.
Okay, so that was baseball catch.
But
Okay.
he likes to be dramatic.
So
Yes.
was that a tap or a loop?
Tap.
Tap. And what did it sound like? Oh, there you go. So I'm watching the motion, so you're kind of like throwing your arm.
Yeah, I'm thinking like they're all the way in the back.
Like
before
you're
it
going
goes
back to
to
catch the
audience.
ball.
Just
Absolutely.
makes it, yeah.
So this is kind of like-
the shoulders.
Grinding the shoulder.
Yes. I popped my shoulders out when I was in high school. So
Okay.
if I do that, you hear grinding.
And so hopefully it sounds like the ball hitting the glove, right?
Yeah.
That's why you don't see me do the most extravagant moves.
So hopefully you can see where a group can get together and they can do this. And the ideal, circumstance would be to not just have them do this, but that they're creating a pattern, right? So it goes back to the whole purpose of this lesson of recognizing patterns, that computational thinking component. But you can also see where sometimes you're just having really great conversations and you want to let it play out and explore, and then you can come back and bring it together. It's like, okay, we have these sounds now. So we have a bat, a you're out, a cheer, and a catch. Those can definitely be put into a pattern, right? And so then you could ask, well, first you play the baseball bat sound, right? You're gonna swing the bat, you're hitting the ball, and then you might say, well, the next thing, the ball's flying through the air, and Justin's gonna catch the ball, he's gonna put his hand up, he's gonna catch it, right? And then there's going to be two things that happen then. One, the umpire is gonna say, you're out, right? So that's Sean's, and then we're gonna use tripties, which is the cheering, hopefully, depending on which team you're going for, you're cheering that they caught the ball. So even with this exploration, we can bring it back together and recognize the pattern building of the activity. Okay, so hopefully everyone had a chance to explore, to see how the sensors kind of come into this, but also to see you don't have to rush that, right? You can lay the foundation, talk about all these different pieces. This lesson really brings a lot of different pieces together. We have the Foley artist and the idea of sounds matching motion. And hopefully you can see how that makes sense now for this lesson, that we're matching sounds and motion together. We have the foundation of sports knowledge, of baseball vocabulary, and you can see where this could be done with other sounds in our database, and it can be done with other motions, and you can kind of talk about and teach different components together. There's lots of different options there for you to work with. So we just have a few minutes until lunch, and this is just an opportunity for you to take a look at the lesson plan and look at some of the adaptations and extensions that are listed there. And of course, there's always the opportunity for you to do something that's not in the lesson that works for your students. And so if we kind of go down there, I'm just gonna take a real quick look with you at the adaptations. One of the things that it mentions in there are things like, if the physical motions are not inclusive for your students. We saw that with the Zoom, right? We saw people using hand gestures only, or even finger people running, which I thought was wonderful, Sonia. Thank you for sharing that option with us. You have these different things to make this more inclusive of students who may not feel as comfortable doing some of the big motions, allowing them to do small ones. Imagine you could do this with puppets, right? Like you could do this with younger students with puppets, where they could be going through the motions, and it takes some of that burden off the student from being completely out there and moving their body, but they're still engaged and working through it. And so there's a lot of different options to do with that. Just making sure we are aware that we're encouraging our classmates and our students, even if things look different, Some students when they swing, some adults when they swing a bat, it doesn't look very graceful, and that's okay. We want to make sure that everyone feels supported and that we can work to grow in that area. And so that's definitely some of the adaptations you see there. And then with the extensions, there's all sorts of things you can do within baseball, looking at different patterns, or even showing a clip from a real baseball game and then having them act out the sequence they saw there, right? Like you show them a famous, maybe at bat where someone hits a home run, and then you can act that all out between strike one, strike two, and with 2 strikes, the hit, and then you have the running, and then the home run call and the cheering. You could set up that pattern to match actual baseball clips. So there's a lot of different opportunities here for application and extension. So I'd like to wrap up with just some opportunities for any questions or ideas that came up during the discussion. So if you're on Zoom, you can drop them in chat or unmute and share. If you're in person, we'd love to hear any questions you have or ideas that you thought of that you were working through this, like, wow, we could do this too. So any thoughts, questions, or ideas? Well, we'll be here through lunch. We'll be chatting as we're eating, and so obviously you can ask questions then and
Thank
continue
you,
the conversation.
Jonathan.
All right.